So our first showcase, and I'm very excited to welcome you, Zoe, is on the pleasure-centered sexual safety for neurodivergent people project. And so I'm going to hand over to you, and your time starts now, Zoe.
Quick question. Okay, cool. Someone has the thing. Or I just say, next slide, please. Cool.
That's right.
Okay, great. I can't actually read that, so I have a bigger one next to me that I can read. Hello, everyone. I am Zoe Simmons. I use she, they pronouns. I was a part of this project in co-design. I also do lived experience journalism, whatever I can to try and make the world a better place. So our project was developing strengths and pleasure-centered understandings of sexual safety for neurodivergent women, trans and gender diverse people in Victoria with a lot of great people from the Australian Research Centre and Sex Health and Society, La Trobe University, Women with Disabilities Victoria, the Olga Tennyson Autism Research Centre, and La Trobe's Gender-Based Violence Research Group. Sorry, these were the slides that my other partner was supposed to be doing, so I don't know if I'm supposed to read. But next slide, please. Okay. So the challenge, obviously, then working with a whole bunch of lived experience, people with lived experience, and well, when you come into this space to want to ensure sexual safety for people, you probably obviously had the experience of being unsafe, which is unfortunately rife in the neurodivergent community. I know research is emerging on this, but I did see a French study saying like 9 in 10 autistic women, which is rough. So the challenge then is how do we support the discussion of sensitive topics relating to like sexual safety, violence, disability, and marginalization, because that is very, very scary. Could we please switch to the next slide? I'm just conscious we have only 7 minutes. I'm trying to speed run this. So we had 7 co-design meetings. We ran from October to March. It was great that inclusion and access were core design principles rather than adjustments. Like even just this meeting where we had anticipate how it works best for you. I find that is really rare in a professional. It's usually like, no, fit inside these non-disabled boxes, or you can't be here, or you're not taken seriously. So that was really good. There was we addressed power dynamics and confidence, although I personally found it kind of. I'll explain this in the next slide because that is what I was planning to do. But lived experience was represented across the team at all levels, including the research team, not just those that were lived experience. And I thought that was absolutely incredible. It just made you feel so safe and that you're not just a tokenistic, representation. Next slide, please. So what are we learning? Obviously that flexible participation and accessibility helps you work better, funny enough. Wish a lot of workplaces understood that. But having flexible ways to participate, like I can't always verbally speak or like have the camera on because I'm worried about like what's my face doing as an autistic person, and like, oh no, I'm like nodding right. It's like I don't know, it's too much, it's too exhausting, and sometimes having chronic pain. I have like a pain face as my resting face, so not really good to um so I get sensitive about that. So it was really great to have that as the norm and that you could speak in the chat. We had scheduled breaks, we had clear written communication, we had, we could step away if we needed to, and also having disability-led facilitation. Like Jax Brown was our mix between lived experience and sorry, research. I don't know. But that was really amazing to have the disability led representation because it felt like we were valued more than just tokenistic. And the power sharing was built into the meetings so that it had greater consensus. So if we, it was just we couldn't just have, researchers versus lived experience, which never happened in our project. But I know sometimes lived experience is viewed as an optional add-on, which it is not. It is a vital component. One thing I really liked was permission to be inarticulate and appear as you are and be open and share personal anecdotes, even if you don't know it's going to be right. So that made me feel a lot more comfortable, especially someone with like extreme anxiety. and employing lived experience researchers as paid members of the research team. Like I got to be a La Trobe casual academic for a few months and I felt very cool. I never thought I would ever get to that stage. Next slide, please. But yeah, I think that helped us all feel like we actually had a role to play rather than just being like, I don't know, I found a little lived experience things were just there to be tokenistic and say that they cared. So what helped? These were my slides originally, so apologies if I just read through the other ones. But embedding lived experience across all the levels, and there was a care and concern for well-being of the team above all, not just like the neurotypical standards of communication. Oh, that's actually the next slide. But clarity about neurodivergent versus neurotypical communication, because like there's a lot of spaces where if you don't make eye contact, you're seen as rude. If you um are like fidgeting, you must be rude. If you're not, like, oh, just all these like rules that neurotypical communication is deemed as what we should be doing, which is not helpful for neurodivergent people who then have to like, oh, I don't even know what you're saying. Why don't you just say it? Um, it was also helpful to realize imposter syndrome impacts us all. Um, like I actually felt a lot of imposter syndrome, and I didn't really mention it until our last meeting. And then, as I mentioned it, like everyone else was like, "Oh yeah, I felt imposter syndrome too," including on the research team. So, um, it was nice to know that was shared across. And I guess like the imposter syndrome comes from like, "Oh, am I really valid?" As a contributor in this, surrounded by like these really fancy academics. But I think in our group it was really nice to feel like that. And accessibility and inclusion is paramount. And that just made it feel like such a safer place to share, especially in these really, really hard topics. Also, my last note, this is my contribution, pizza does equal love, because in our last meeting we had pizza and it was very good. Next slide. I won't waste my time talking about pizza, but I do think meeting, it's a great thing. Um, it was a shame it wasn't until the end for us, but it was great being able to participate from home because, so many reasons, whether you're kids, whether you're chronic fatigue, whether, you live far away, you don't, you know, COVID and sickness, whatever. It's so good to have the option to do this from home, even though it would have been so lovely to actually like meet all of you in person and so on. Um, and same with our team. It's so nice to have that inclusion as the main, not having to like push ourselves. Um, so final lessons lived experience in co-design are more than just nice things to have. It shaped the project and our experiences. And I think with our project, we had one of the most co-design heavy, I'm not sure if it was in the NRDP or like the university that they were talking about, but I know like a lot of other projects did only have like one or two. Um, Whereas we had like, oh my gosh, I'm going to say five, but I might be wrong in that. I'm so sorry. Four, five. But also the fact that our like research team were neurodivergent as well. So it didn't even really feel like that. It felt like we were all connected, which is beautiful. And these opportunities don't happen much. It was great that everyone comes from different backgrounds. Everyone has something to add, even if they don't feel like it. And, so none of us are imposters, even if we feel like it. And the importance of creating these psychologically safe spaces where you can just be yourself, where you can be, anxious, where you can be like, oh, I don't know what I'm saying, and just be yourself and like, oh, I don't know if this is relevant. Actually, that tends to be how I contribute. Like, I don't know if this is relevant. And it usually is, because like when we come together and think of things, like really good stuff happens. I don't need to tell you all of that. It is very weird presenting to myself and not seeing anyone's facial expressions. So I hope this is okay. Just a little side note is I was once speaking, I met the author Tara Moss at one of her events, and she told me even she has imposter syndrome. Even someone who is like this incredible best-selling author, every time she writes a book, she says she feels like she can't do it. Which I'm like, oh, that just unlocks so much for me. Like, wow, that little inner saboteur. I don't know if we have one more slide. Sorry. Do we? Oh, no. And we don't have an email because I don't know. Um, but yeah, I'm really grateful to have been a part of this. It felt really incredible, and I hope I have the opportunity again. It was a little bit sad that we didn't get funded for our second round. Hopefully at some point. Uh, Goodness, because these projects are so important to make us feel like we're actually part of the team and that we're not just coming in at the end for like tokenistic representation. Sorry, Mary, if I've gone over my 7 minutes.
You haven't. You've been perfect, Zoe.
Oh.
Well done. And the real takeaway for me was it was accessibility by design, not as an afterthought.
Yes.
And yeah, loved hearing that from you. And yes, imposter syndrome is real. I can guarantee I feel that too. So thank you for sharing your experience. We will be doing questions at the end. And Zoe, you're welcome to pop the team email in the chat at the end, or we can send it after the event as well.
I'm
So
not sure what it is.
that's okay. We can send it after the event. So thank you very much, Zoe. Our next project is exploring the mobility safety concerns of Australians with deaf blindness. And I'm delighted to welcome Meredith Prain, who's going to talk about the project that they conducted. So over to you, Meredith.
Thanks a lot, Mary, and thanks for sharing your presentation, Zoe. That was terrific to hear about the work you did. So yes, that's the name of our project up there, exploring the mobility safety concerns of Australians with deaf blindness. So my name's Meredith Prain. My pronouns are she, her, and I have a severe vision impairment. So I'm accessing this session today using screen magnification. Our team were myself, Dr. Sue Silvera, Associate Professor Kathleen Tate, Ms. Heather Lawson, Mr. Stephen Hallinan, Ms. Melinda Carter, and Ms. Lisa Chen. So next slide. So thanks, the NDRP did their great acknowledgement of country, but I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm here today on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, where I gratefully live, work and play every day on these stolen lands, where it's currently the season of gulling, and orchids are starting to bloom. I was just 5 days on Djab Wurrung country and we saw some greenhood orchids. So if you're on Wurundjeri country, keep an eye out for orchids and the wattle blooming in gulling season, and just acknowledgement and paying respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait people with us here today. So next slide. So it was very, very much a collaboration, and the different representation from different perspectives was critical to our work. So we had collaboration from myself from Able Australia, Sue Silvera from Next Sense Institute, Kathleen Tate from Macquarie University. So three of us, myself with service provision and research backgrounds, Sue and Kath with the research backgrounds. But then we had the four members of our team with deaf blindness. So Heather from Deafblind Victoria, Melinda from Deafblind West Australians, and Lisa and Stephen from Hunter Deafblind Connect. So Lisa representing Sydney and Stephen representing Hunter. And so having those peers and the relationships that they had with their member organisations was really critical to the success of our project. So next slide. So the challenges and the opportunity. So 2 years ago, the international classification of functioning, disability and health core sets for deaf blindness were developed. And in the development of those ICF core sets, all stakeholders identified mobility as a major concern for people with deaf blindness, but in particular, people with deaf blindness really highlighted mobility as a major concern. So this, the NDRP funding round gave us the opportunity to actually hear and better understand the concerns from the perspective of people with deaf blindness. I think very often people with deaf blindness are excluded from research because researchers don't have the relationships and don't have the understanding about the complex and diverse range of communication methods required to engage with people with deaf blindness. So it was a wonderful opportunity to do a bit of a deep dive in what are the mobility safety concerns. So next slide. So what we did, so first we established the steering committee, and 4 of the 7 had deafblindness, and then myself with vision loss. So 5 out of the 7 lived with sensory disability. We ran focus groups in Victoria, New South Wales, and Western Australia. And the focus groups were co-facilitated by myself and one of the deafblind members of the team. Once we'd done the focus groups, we analysed the transcripts from the focus groups using thematic analysis, and I'll talk through the themes that came out. Then, because all of the steering committee members were at the focus groups, we looked at the analysis together just to confirm that that was a correct analysis. And then the 7 of us formulated 3 different research questions coming out of that analysis. And we really were focusing on research questions that we felt like could impact practice and policy, that we wanted to think about research that could really make an impact for the safety of people with deafblindness. So I'll get to that on the next slide. But once we workshopped those 3 questions and sort of fine-tuned them, and then we sent those questions back out to the focus group participants to vote on what their top questions. So I'll get to that. But just in terms of running the focus groups, we had 20 interpreters booked for 21 participants. So I think that just sort of highlights managing that number of interpreters and other communication supports as well is I think one of the reasons people with deafblindness get excluded. And Erin mentioned at the start that that communication access and support is so critical for co-design and just research participation of this group of people. So next slide. What are we learning? So when we looked, we were asking people about their mobility safety concerns, and really the most concerns came out under structural issues. So things like broken footpaths, traffic light issues, even just fallen branches or obstacles, pipes. There was a lot of structural issues, just safe paths. There were also quite a lot of issues with vehicles, so with taxis and Ubers, but a lot of issues with parking and where vehicles were parking not in spots that were in people's way. Then issues with public transport, and in particular accessing information to public transport and public transport not running to time or to schedule, and not being able to get announcements if things are changing. But then human assistance was another big topic. So particularly service providers who assist, so orientation and mobility specialists and communication guides that provide support. Quite a few people reported they hadn't been guided appropriately or adequately. Also public transport staff, and a lot of people were also using just fellow pedestrians on the street to provide assistance. So there was quite a lot of just that human assistance when you're out and about, and also from service providers that were coming up that were barriers and issues. In terms of learning about co-design, just the importance of relationships, and I'll talk a bit more about that, but also the importance of communication support and additional time, the time that it takes to go through with Auslan interpretation, through plain language statements for research and consent forms. So all of that takes a lot longer with this group of people. Next slide. So what helped? So having really strong state-based deafblind groups, so these have emerged over more recent years, and so we picked the states because they had this strongest state-based groups. So there are really good, strong, thriving groups in Victoria, in the Hunter and in Perth, which is why we ran the focus groups in those areas, because we could leverage off the strong networks and relationships that already existed in those areas. And then the relationships was really important. I've worked in this field for 30 years, so have quite strong relationships with those state-based groups. But then I don't know all the members, so having the deafblind reps on our steering committee, they had the relationships to explain the research and put that out to people. And there was that trust already, because the relationships were there. So when there's the trust, people are more likely to be more willing to participate. Then the experience of the lead researcher, so that's me, in facilitating groups of people with deafblindness. I think just working with large groups of interpreters, making sure the interpreters are really well prepared, making sure the room is set up and prepared really well, that you've got really good lighting, really good acoustics, good amplification. All of that takes a lot of setting up, and when you're doing it remotely, working with the state-based leaders. So all of that takes a lot of extra time and effort to make sure that people can participate fully and adequately, but also just going around knowing that there's the lag with interpretation, so checking in with people if they have something that they want to add. So I've facilitated many groups over many years, so having that experience really benefited this project. And then just having the adequate and prepared communication support, making sure all the communication guides and all the interpreters were really prepared and knew what was going to happen in the sessions. And our final lessons. So the key research priorities that came out, so our actual final question that got voted on was, what do orientation and mobility specialists need to know about people with deafblindness to work better with them? But the other groups that we were looking at were communication guides and also public transport staff. So it was a similar question, but and with the comm guides, it was very much around their guiding skills. But our final question was focusing on what is it that orientation and mobility specialists need to know. And also final lessons were in undertaking research with people with deafblindness, making sure that researchers form and leverage relationships with deafblind peer-led groups, and also ensuring that additional funding for communication support and that there's plenty of time, so that communication support is there to ensure inclusion and participation. I think that's it. And then if anyone wants to follow up, they can contact me at my email address at ableaustralia.org.au. Hopefully that's pretty well to time. Thank you, Mary.
Mary speaking, and I'm not sure if I'm on Spotlight yet, but I'm hoping you can hear me. Here I am. Thank you very much, Meredith. Yeah, I really loved, 20 participants, 20 interpreters. That is a lot of planning that's required, and I also love that you are really looking into research that could have immediate real world change as well. So thank you very much, and we'll have some time for some questions at the end. Our next presentation is from Jessica Moulton, Karen Noble, and Tess Moody. Welcome, and we're really excited to hear about your project, Reproductive Justice and Neurodivergence. So thanks very much, Jess.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Mary. So hi everyone. Today as Mary said, we're presenting on our project, which is focused on reproductive justice and neurodivergence. So I'm Jess Moulton, and Karina Noble is also here online. Unfortunately, Tess is unwell today, so unable to join us. But yeah, Tess is amazing. So hopefully you get to hear them in the future. I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're all joining from today. So for me, it's the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nations, and pay respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. And I just wanted to note that I think in light of the topic we're discussing today, I also wanted to acknowledge the ongoing impacts of colonisation and also the leadership of First Nations people in advancing reproductive justice and self-determination. So next slide, thanks, Jess. So just before we move on to our presentation, I also wanted to acknowledge that the three of us are part of a big and amazing research team, which includes many lived and living experience researchers, partner organisations, and university collaborators as well. So thank you to all the team. Next slide, thanks, Jess. So neurodivergent people often face inequities in sexual and reproductive healthcare. So one example is that neurodivergent people are more likely to have endometriosis, but are also much more likely to receive their diagnosis and treatment much later than our neurotypical peers. And then there's also been research highlighting experiences that can undermine safety, autonomy, and trust when neurodivergent folks are making reproductive decisions, including kind of pressure and coercion. So despite this research, we actually don't know much about what reproductive justice actually means to neurodivergent people themselves, or what issues matter most for the communities in this area. So our aim was to co-design a future research protocol based on the community's priorities. Thanks, Jess. So we set up a community reference group made up of 10 neurodivergent folk from Western Australia, Tasmania, and Victoria. And to reduce barriers to participation, people could meet and contribute in different ways. This includes, we had Zoom meetings, email, chat, and Padlet as well. And we had 4 2-hour meetings that had breaks, but also there was an option to engage between meetings via Padlet or email as well. We also had a steering committee of lived experience researchers, university partners, and community organisations that helped translate these priorities into a research protocol. And unfortunately, I don't have time to discuss today, but we co-designed our governance structure for the next phase with our community reference group to try and improve on how we could improve that structure. So across our meetings, there was a common priority from the community. Our community members described being judged, dismissed, pressured, or not believed when seeking sexual and reproductive health care. And these experiences affected trust, autonomy, safety, and access to care. And members also highlighted how assumptions about gender, sexuality, and childbearing can leave some people feeling judged, excluded, or supported when they're seeing a doctor or nurse or other healthcare provider. So as a result, improving safety in sexual and reproductive healthcare was identified as the highest priority for future research. Next slide, thanks, Jess. Awesome. So the project produced 2 key outcomes. First, we developed a ready-to-go co-designed research protocol based on community priorities. So the group helped define the focused language, activities, and questions within the research protocol. And the proposed study will look at what actually constitutes or comprises safe and neuroaffirming sexual and reproductive health care in practice. And a second kind of key output was actually valuable learnings on how to co-design research with neurodivergent communities in ways that support flexibility, accessibility, and meaningful participation. So I'll now hand over to Karina to share reflections from the community reference group and why this process mattered.
Thanks. Next slide. Thanks, Jess. And I just want to acknowledge the community reference group because I was part of that, but I also am representing the rest of the group. And I'll speak to some of the things that were really important for the process and the project and the outcomes of what we're looking to do in the future as well. So it really was such an inclusive and accessible approach. And there really was a low burden to entry. So, and that matters because it builds trust as the group comes together to design the projects and to figure out like what is really important to the community. And when things are accessible, when you're creating a safer and more trauma-informed space, it means that when people feel respected, especially when you're navigating difficult conversations, they stay involved for longer. You get more meaningful contributions because people feel able and safe to contribute their lived experience and it's more relevant. So the contributions I feel are more relevant because people feel safer. And I think that means then as a group, we're able to focus more on the goals of the community and the project, and people keep showing up and engaging in the project. It means the whole protocol and process is more community grounded. And I would like to just use an example of what happened early on that created some safety for the group. There was discussion around wording changes, for example, using safer rather than safe and lived and living experience. And these were taken seriously and actioned really early on, which did build the trust. And also having the solidarity. As someone who has not only been in many community reference groups, but also facilitated them, the solidarity of having multiple voices and shared experience at the table rather than being the tick box tokenistic person that's, like we talked about, not being an afterthought, was really important for that engagement. And I really did feel like it was a very efficient and engaged group as a result. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be just speaking to this briefly on behalf of Tess, who unfortunately couldn't be here. We learned throughout the process that investing early in that lived and living experience leadership really does help shift the power dynamics, but also like share that power in those those foundational decisions and the protocols for the group and for the project. And it really does allow that tailoring of the research. And it meant that when people aren't invested in a very specific outcome, it allows that to evolve and change because of the safety and the trust built and the genuine co-design process, because that was at the core of the research practice that Uni of Melbourne led. It wasn't an add-on. And so it actually evolved what was important to the community. And that was the outcome of what the research is going to be as a result of that. And it is the trauma-informed practice. I don't have time to speak to it in detail, but it really is important for that safety and that genuine inclusiveness. And it does impact how projects evolve. And so it's a big part, what did we achieve and what is emerging from this project is research that's ready for future pieces of work. So what was achieved was a really solid connection and network of researchers and consultants in the medical field and lived experience consultants and facilitators that are ready to go to further this work. The project is continuing to develop trauma-informed interview questions when we go to the neurodivergent community, to start to with the next piece of research work. And so there's a really solid foundation to roll out from. And it's been an absolute pleasure to be involved in such a genuinely co-designed project that is also looking to further that co-design and that work incorporated all in the future. And it will, because of the safety and genuine inclusiveness and accessibility and our avenues to be able to engage, which was very much appreciated by the whole CRG.
And it's Mary speaking. Thank you very much, Jess and Karina.
Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on where I am today, and that is here on the lands of the Gold Coast, which is the Yugambeh people. Pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And also would like to acknowledge all First Nations people who are watching. I really appreciate everyone's time, and I think that it's really important for us to share what our learnings have been throughout the process. And I think, Alex, I'll let you start and jump on board.
Thanks so much, everyone. And again, it is great to be able to pre-record some learnings that we've had from our round one NDRP co-designing approach on the issue of safety. Our research and co-design process focused on continence and First Nations women with disabilities and how that intersects with safety. We felt that this was really important because we know that 1 in 3 people with disability experience incontinence, whether that be related to bladder or bowel control. We also know that disability is more prevalent in First Nations communities and that women are more likely to experience incontinence. Access to quality continence care is essential for independence, autonomy, dignity, participation, inclusion, health and well-being, and together these are incredibly important for safety. Yet incontinence remains a really hidden and sensitive topic to talk about in all communities, and there are several barriers to accessing quality continence care. Yet there's really little evidence from First Nations communities about their experiences and what might help improve access to culturally responsive continence care and therefore safety and well-being. Over to you, Jodie.
So what we did in our co-design process was to identify what are the emerging priorities in terms of the last several years. So we talked with community and individuals, practitioners. NDRP round 1 was really what we found was to present ideas in a way and give opportunities so that we could progress understanding of the co-design and what that approach would be in terms of the benefits to community. And how women with disabilities in First Nations communities would gain information that they need from the beginning of the process onwards and not having to wait until things became critical. And through our connections and the gathering throughout the team of people's experiences, whether they be people with disabilities, parents, carers, continence carers, service providers, and also those who are challenging, finding the experiences challenging. We also knew that we had to work through a cultural lens, not just one culture, but different approaches. We had to work with a team for cultural safety issues and incontinence care. We had a few discussions around the priorities and we communicated across the teams and individuals who had lived experience to understand their issues and how we can manipulate the research so that we can get the aims of the questions and the co-design process correct and right. That required flexibility and diverse relationships, either at one-on-one basis, knowledge exchange. We also had diverse approaches, whether at face-to-face, online, and I also work with the Aboriginal community and with incontinence care nurses, and we also worked very flexibly right across the board. We collaborated and we had reciprocity in terms of knowledge sharing. That was before, during, and after the project. So what did you learn, Alex?
Well, I think I think one of the other really important things was that the diversity of the team that we had, so people with lived experience, community members, continence care practitioners, and university academics, it meant that we could really understand the issue from lots of approaches, and make really good connections for writing up the protocol and identifying good policy and practice partnerships for the potential next stage. And I think the other things that we also really learnt more about was cultural safety and also continence care and co-design approaches. And just learning along the way more about that lived experience from the women and the families and also the support workers. So really being able to triangulate that information.
I think what was valuable for us was also that we were able to take our different hats on and off when we needed to. When we talked about the gender lens as well, we talked about what are the hidden pieces of information related to the issues? And women often don't discuss it. Women with disabilities, they don't ask what they need for the future or for future generations' needs. So services might be needed. So I think there's a variety, not only a certain age group, but right across the spectrum. And I think that it's really valuable, this conversation for all of us in terms of how we design the process approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other really important thing from a university academic perspective is often we're always in such a rush. We often have predetermined ideas of what we think will work. And having that opportunity for that whole year to really slow down and listen in so many different ways to just try and find out what the key ideas are and then work as a team to represent them in that broader picture was really, yeah, just so important and a big reminder of what you learn when you do that listening and slow things down. And I've just got there, yeah, my mind was blown by how much I didn't know about continence care, and all the tips and tricks that we learnt along the way have been life-changing as a parent of a young person with disability. And I just wish I'd known it earlier. But I now know that if I go to a party, I don't need to share those tips and tricks because people are not as interested as I am, perhaps.
I think what I valued with the opportunity for this year was to slow down, but also to have those conversations with women from our cultured communities in different areas where we could teach, demonstrate, and discuss and explain to women in community about what's available to them and also empower them so that they can come forth and represent and advocate for either themselves or their mums, their sisters, their aunts, their daughters, right across the board. And I think that was really positive for me. And I can see things happening from the start of our project, people being very shy, not wanting to be involved and quite reluctant. And then over time, to be able for them to hear about it and then come forth to say, this is what we want, this is what we need. And that has been so terrific. It's that flexibility. It's been valuable.
Yep, absolutely. And even though we're not there in person today, Jodie and I, this is an ongoing priority for us now, and we're really keen to keep the conversation going in other ways. And if you've got any questions, we're sure the NDRP will pass on our details. But thank you for joining us today, and sorry we couldn't be there in person.
Yes, I would agree with you, Alex. Apologies that we're not there, but I'm hoping that we can see you at the next one and give you even further updates to what we've learned. Thank you. Thank you for your time, and thank you to our interpreter and the captioning. Thanks.
And Mary speaking, that was such a powerful presentation. I'm sure you'll agree. My reflection is on slowing down and having particular resourcing available for the co-design enables the time that can be taken. Our next speaker is Andrew Brown, and Andrew will be talking around the building culturally safe support for refugee communities. So I'll hand over to you now, Andrew.
Andrew speaking. Thank you very much, Mary. I'm really pleased to be here. And as you can see on my slide, I'm representing quite a large team of Deakin researchers, Bendigo healthcare workers, and amazing Karen and Afghan Hazara community members who all led this project and worked on it together. So I humbly hope that I can share some of the richness of this amazing group as I talk through some of what we did. Next slide, please. All right, so the opportunity and the challenge. So there's, as many of you might know, there's an increasing number of people with disability from refugee backgrounds settling in Australia. And then even more so because of government priorities, a lot of them are being directed to rural and regional areas. And we know that there's already challenges with access to services for all people, and certainly people with disabilities in rural and regional areas. And then when we layer on the need for cultural safety on top of that and other things, it amplifies this challenge. I'm a social worker and I'm really keen on the strengths-based perspective. So I don't want to just highlight this as a challenge. It's, for me, wonderful that Australia is becoming more and more multicultural, and we have amazing communities, cultures coming in, such as some Afghan Hazara background and Karen background, amongst many others. So one of the things we really centered in this project wasn't just, oh, there's a big challenge in front of us, but also there's an amazing community that's forming in Bendigo, full of amazing people doing amazing work, and service providers who really on the ground are trying their best. There's always more to do. So we were very honest about the challenges and how racism, barriers, ableism came up, but we really tried to hold both, challenging ourselves to do better, but also recognizing especially the strength of the community, but also the opportunities within services. So we took a co-design approach as we thought about these kind of intersectional issues and how to improve cultural safety of services. Next slide. One of the things that was really important to us in doing our approach was, given that we were thinking about people with lots of different experiences of disability or not, with lots of different backgrounds, but we also had people with lots of different experiences and confidence in English or not. We were working across 3 languages. Gender factored in, because gender is a really important varying social identity across. Gender shows up in lots of different ways in lots of different cultures. So a real key pinnacle of our co-design approach was lots of different ways to engage. So we did one-on-one interviews in language. We had a steering group that was made up of majority people with disability from the Afghan Hazara community that had decision-making authority. They had a great conversation with us early on in the project about what does safety even mean? Because again, when we layer on that refugee and asylum seeker background, some of them are coming from places where they've experienced war and other forms of violence. And so this idea of moving from physical safety to cultural safety, mental health safety, challenging discrimination was a big leap, and it was really important learning for all of us. And then we actually also had a co-design group that did systems mapping, sense making of the interviews, working that together. And that co-design group, again, was majority Afghan, Hazara, and Karen people with disabilities, but it was also made up of service providers and Deakin researchers working together to not do analysis of what's coming up from the group separately, but actually to do it all together. The last thing I'll say before going to the next slide is I want to highlight the artwork that you saw at the previous one and on this one. One of the things I'll highlight throughout this presentation is the importance of multiple forms of communication, verbal, written, multiple languages, visual, and we were able to hire artists from the Afghan Hazara community and Karen community to create representations of disability in the local community. And working with those artists and sharing that with participants and working out what we wanted to do with that art and how we could really celebrate the community, but also do education through them was a real highlight of this project. Next slide, please. So we, again, from that strengths-based perspective, we really valued working across 3 languages and culture groups. What that did is it really forced us to slow down and ask questions in a way that, yeah, we just didn't have any other choice. So of course we had then the inclusion lens around people with disabilities, but it really put intersectionality into brought it to real life, where we had people with lots of different experiences. And one of the things that we really made sure to focus on as we were working across those 3 languages and groups was that we were going slow and allowing time and challenging power so that people could tell us, slow down, this doesn't make sense. I'm actively trying to not speak quickly, but you can probably pick up on the fact that I naturally speak very quickly. The number of times I was told, slow down, stop. I had to have a lot of humility myself and openness to that. So I think that humility to learn, be corrected, learn from one another is a key part of this. I don't, in this short presentation, have time to talk in detail about that image on the right. It's a systems map. It's one of the many things that we did. But the reason I've got this on the screen is it has the 3 different languages on the map. And one of the things that's important to me to highlight here is when I was creating the systems map, I realized that Dari, that people from the Afghan Hazara background speak, is actually not written from left to right. It's written from right to left. The reason, on the one hand, that sounds really trivial and specific, but on the other hand, that's one of the key learnings in this project is those little specific details matter. If we want to put languages side by side, and it's possible that the languages aren't even read from the same direction, how do you actually do that in a way that's clear? So we really thought, we got into the weeds of the practical, what does it look like for this to happen? And one of the things that we really emphasized in our project and what systems mapping allowed us to do is think about how there's connections, you see arrows there, between the different issues that we're experiencing on the project and how those connections between issues matter and how we might think about those. Next slide, please. So there's a couple of things that really allowed us to make this work. One is we already had a relationship even before this project. We were so grateful to the NDRP that we were able to focus on relationship building here. But the reality is, because there was already a relationship, that really helped us to continue to really deepen that go forward. The fact that we did engage with community members at every single stage of the process in different ways was really important in that trust building and relationship building. I've already flagged the allowing time. We really had to slow down, make sure that we were working in a way that allowed everybody to contribute. And then I lastly wanted to just give a practical example, and keeping an eye on time, I'll wrap up very soon, of everyone learned and everyone contributed. We really, from the start, us as researchers especially, were emphasizing to both the community members and the service providers, we're not the experts here to teach you, we're here to learn from us. So a really important example of that I'll just give briefly before wrapping up is we did a learning session with Afghan Hazara and Korean community members about their culture led by them and the messages they wanted to teach us, and really emphasize that this is your knowledge, this is your lived experience, and we're lucky to be learning this from you. So really creating those very specific ways everybody was learning from everybody. Next slide. And this is my last one, which actually really summarizes what I've been saying throughout. So I'll just end by saying that thinking about interconnections, bicultural workers, peer workers, community workers, they're sitting in systems trying to do systems change, and they're caught between different issues trying to navigate that, and really thinking about how the different issues relate was a key learning of this project. We had to practice strategies in real time that are relevant to the exact issues that we were trying to solve. So for example, that systems map with languages. And then lastly, that value of multiple forms of communication that just kept coming up across the artwork, the systems mapping, written communication, verbal, really fabulous in this project. Thanks, everybody. And that's just our contact.
Mary speaking. Thanks, Andrew. So blown away by all these projects and the amazing work you've done. What I really took away from you was around that power shifting and creating that learning culture and that learning environment where everyone came together. So congratulations, that's really great work. Our next speakers are Auntie Ros Sackley, Sharon Kerr and Shalard Daniels May talking about Indigenous people with disability in prison. So welcome, Sharon. And I can see Shalar's on the line, but I can't see Auntie Ros.
Auntie Ros is lost in space, and she's she's just grabbing your link, and she will be with us any moment. But this changing from different rooms is really a little bit challenging. The so here is Professor Shalar, and and Arnie Rods will be here any minute. So we will.
She's coming down the chimney.
She's coming down the chimney. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining from beautiful Durrock land up here in the Blue Mountains in New South Wales, and I pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land, but also to those of you who are joining online, and especially to Professor Shalar and to Auntie Ros, as she will join us any second. The project that we did and we've started upon is Barriers Within Bars, and it was a knowledge synthesis, and it was looking at what is happening with Indigenous prisoners with disability in Australia. Now, one of the big issues with this, and I'm speaking as a non-Aboriginal woman, is the whole concept of undiagnosed and unsupported disability, and that leads to a lot of the issues that are happening with our Indigenous Australians. So look, I'm wondering if we can have it so that we can see the full screen rather than the shared PowerPoint. We won't, you will have access to this PowerPoint, but I'd prefer you in this 7 minutes to have the opportunity to hear from Shalar and to hear from Auntie Ros and to hear their perspectives of why this is it's so important to do this research. So Shalar, can I just, maybe if we can just start with the question of why you felt this research was important and why you embarked upon this, and maybe a little bit about yourself as well. And then if we can go into why it is that disability is often undiagnosed and unsupported for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Sharon. So I'm Associate Professor Shalar Daniels Mays, coming from the stolen lands of the Wurundjeri people, otherwise known as Melbourne. I'm from the University of Melbourne. I'm a Gomeroi woman from northwest New South Wales on my mum's side of the family. I'm legally blind. I work with a guide dog named Topaz, who recently became a scholarly author. She got published along with Sharon's emotional support dog in a paper. So we very much connect with our non-human kin within what we do. So we're part of a project which has become known as Black Ability, looking at First Nations ways of understanding disability and how that knowledge can not only benefit First Nations people, but also benefit the disability community more broadly, and in turn society more generally. We have a lot of issues. I mean, Indigenous and disability intersect, absolutely, but then it intersects with a whole lot of other things. And one of the most troubling that we've come across in lived experience, but also through royal commissions, people talking with us, is this intersection of Indigenous disability and the prison system, which, and Sharon will mention this, which contrary to what everybody was saying, the research is done, but it certainly hasn't been done, or the small bit that has been done seems to be sitting on a shelf. It seems not to be getting put into practice. So this was what, very suited to what we're talking about today, evidence to action. What is the evidence? And then the next step will be about, what action needs to be taken for this to actually become a reality. So this is a project that has been close to my heart for decades. It is personal, with family who are Indigenous and disabled in and out of the criminal justice system. And I think that happens for a lot of us. What we do is both personal and professional. So we came up with this project around those parameters.
Yeah. So I think in total we looked at 177 reports.
Yeah.
And
From the
only
last 5 years.
18 of those
Yeah.
actually looked at disability as well, And but then speaking to academics who have done work in this area, they said, especially when you start including mental health, everyone's got the disability, and which really makes you question what is happening with our society, that we are imprisoning our Indigenous people with disabilities. Can you talk a little bit, please, Shalar, about what it is, the Indigenous perspective disability, how it differs, and why Indigenous people may not have identified as having a disability or have supports in place?
Yep. So I'll do this very briefly. So before invasion in 1788, if you were born into your community, into your mob, if you were born into a community and you had some sort of disability that wasn't, an obvious disability, in this case, say blindness, deafness, limp, a missing leg, whatever, the basic reality, and Scott Avery's done some amazing work around this, the basic reality was, so what? You have other ways of being able to contribute to society. So it wasn't the disability, the difference was not seen as something that to be eliminated or fixed or hidden away. It was something that said to community, well, what else can you do? Okay. Yeah. It was always seen as unremarkable, is what Scott Avery refers to, unremarkable, a normal part of human diversity. And whenever you had this difference, whatever that was, then the community would work with you to find out what your strength was. So it's always strength-based, never derogatory, never deficit. And in the 300 plus languages that we have across what we now call Australia, First Nations languages, there is no equivalent derogatory term for disability in any of those languages. That says a lot about how human difference was understood. And we hear stories about, dreaming stories where we can identify, like through Sam Coombs, another amazing First Nation scholar, kids who probably today would be diagnosed with having attention deficit hyperactivity disorder were sent out to pick the berries, because they were very detail focused, those kids, and they would get those berries, but that was leaning into their disability, leaning into their difference, their strength, rather than trying to eliminate it. The clash we have, of course, is pretty obvious. That's not how Western society has created disability. So what you end up with is one world of thinking where you just get on with it, you participate in different ways, you contribute in different ways, but then you have the Western world that tells you that what is wrong with you is wrong. What is different about you is wrong. So it can be very difficult. We've learned from our research participants and our own experiences, it can be very difficult for us to put our hands up and say we have a disability. Firstly, we don't think we do. Secondly, we're also very fearful, and a lot of us experiences with disability, we're very fearful of the consequences of disclosing that, because it's bad enough, and this is me being cynical, it's bad enough being Aboriginal, there's enough that goes along with that, let alone being Aboriginal and having a disability, let alone being Aboriginal, disabled and ending up in the criminal justice system.
Yeah. And I think too the history, Shalar, of children with disability being removed from families has had a big impact as far as a generational impact. And if Auntie Ros, I'm sorry you all can't meet her. She's been trying to, she was in a room, and Auntie Ros is also blind, so she's it's very hard to navigate, and we're in different spots here. But maybe if you could just talk about what happened to the families where children were removed.
So it's an interesting time over the last, couple of 100 years. It's like Aboriginality itself, so your very essence, your very culture was seen as a disability. That's one thing to understand. So quite often in the 1800s, you can find records of Aboriginal people being put into mental asylums purely because they're Aboriginal. Okay, so the culture is the disability. You get into the 1900s, this is still continuing on. If you look at John Gilroy's research, this is still continuing on. But we also know from Arnie Ros, from Sam Coombs' research, that within communities where someone had an obvious disability like blindness or a mental health condition, that child was taken from that family and put into institutional care. So they were taken away from family, away from culture, put into institutional care, where they were hidden from society, and where I wasn't taken for those reasons, but I lived in institutional care for 7 years from the age of 9 to 16. And trust me, the message was very clear that you are what society doesn't want to know about. That's the learning that you get from that care.
Yeah. Another thing that came out of our knowledge, when we're looking at the evidence and speaking to people, is the absolute different way that Indigenous people with disabilities, so they might be acting out, might have mental health issues, schizophrenia, with alcohol associated with it. You sort of like that ad, compare the pair, of the insurance thing. And non-Indigenous, acting out, drunk, schizophrenia, picked up by police, taken to the health system. Aboriginal person with the same presentation, taken to the lockup and taken through the criminal justice system. Now, if we think of what's happening to our children, who are acting out, who, from some of the other reports that we've seen today, if that disability is undiagnosed and unsupported, the route to the criminal justice system, rather than through the health and support, is quite stark, isn't it, Shalar?
It's quite phenomenal, and I think it's important to know that, while we know that, around about 20% of the general population has a disability of some sort, when we look at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, we have about 37% of our community living with disability, chronic health conditions that are disabling, et cetera, et cetera. So we're twice as likely to have a disability.
Yeah.
So when you put disability along with racial profiling, which is what Sharon's talking about, you're going to end up in lockup at some point in time if you're talking to yourself, if you're being what's called disruptive. I know a number of people who have been sent to lockup because they're deaf and they bloody well couldn't hear the police. How do you obey when you can't hear?
Yeah.
But you're also Aboriginal and you look Aboriginal, so therefore you're just causing trouble.
Yeah.
The other one that's really important too is that, think about this, is that, and I've had friends and family, and I use those terms loosely, tell me that they saw someone who looked Aboriginal who was drunk on the street. I went up and said hello to that person to discover that that Aboriginal person, yes, they're Aboriginal, but you know what? They've got Parkinson's.
Yeah, yeah.
So being wobbly on the feet equals being drunk when you are Aboriginal. And Roz's iPhone has just joined the meeting, Sharon.
Oh, Roz, welcome.
Honey, Roz, I just heard you coming in.
Oh, good. I'm glad that you can at least get to see Auntie Roz. Hopefully, Roz, you're here. I cannot, if Mary can put her on the spotlight so that we can see her. The
Yeah,
I
that's the
think
other one. You get a quick trip out of town. I was just hearing the chat. Quick trip out of town with the police, and then you have to walk back to town. How do you do that when you've got Parkinson's or have had a stroke or, you know, have some other form of disability? I mean, really?
yeah. And Auntie Roz, welcome, and sorry about the problems with the links. But you're online now, and we can sort of see you, and it's connecting to the audio.
Yeah.
And we just can't hear you at the moment, but I'm just going to ask Shala a question, and you speak up as soon as you can, as you come live, Roz. That I think one of the other well, two of the things is the remand, people who are being kept on remand with disabilities because they don't meet the conditions for bail.
Yeah.
That was a dreadful thing. And
That's horrific, that one. That one hadn't really been on my radar until this research, okay? I mean, when I heard it, it was like, of course, but it was one of those things that hadn't been on my radar. So I'd read cases and all the rest of it about Aboriginal people being left on remand, which means that you haven't been up in front of a judge or whatever. So left on remand without a trial, without bail hearings sometimes, for extremely long periods of time, much longer than what a sentence would have been, okay? Yeah. And some of the reasons for that we were discovering are because they don't, as Sharon's saying, meet bail conditions. One of those would be, having appropriate housing. Okay, so you need housing that is First Nations culturally safe, but you also need housing that meets your disability needs. Where do you get that housing? That's magical. Where do you get community, support? How do you access services that are actually confident around First Nations and disability and criminal justice? So the easiest option then is to leave you in remand, which is totally against the United Nations.
Yeah. And just to wrap up, Shala, for our next steps, what we're looking at is looking at lifespan, looking at, isn't it, where things start going wrong as far as people with disabilities, Indigenous people with disabilities. And could you just quickly mention that with the leaky pipe methodology that we're going to be doing?
Yeah, so leaky pipe comes from a good mate of mine by the name of Professor Hugh Taylor. Now, Taylor's not Aboriginal. He's a white fellow. He's an ophthalmologist, but he's been working in Aboriginal communities for decades, looking at preventable blindness and working within the communities in Australia. And Hugh came up with a system that the United Nations recognises and the World Health Organization have cottoned onto now. Whereas if you think about a pipe, if it's got leaks in it, that pipe's not going to function very well. So what we're trying to do with the next round of research, so this action work, is think about when Aboriginal child is born with a disability, for example, or acquires a disability later on, as they progress along that pipe, is that pipe got leaks, and where are those leaks? Are they happening at school? Are they happening with not being connected to culture? We have some research that tells us that if Aboriginal kids are not connected to culture strongly by the time they're 7, they're more likely to end up in prison. So is that a leaking pipe part that we need to figure out? How do we plug that leak? And what we're trying to do by identifying the leaks and then trying to plug the leaks is to be able to say, how do we someone stop, go off into tributaries that are prisons and remands and all of these sorts of systems that we know First Nations people end up in. We're trying to plug those leaks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Shala. And Ros, can you hear us? And
Yes, I can hear you.
oh, right.
Hey, Ros. Sorry
Hi,
about
Ros.
that, darling. I filled your big shoes, Gus.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very
Ros,
much.
can you just say in a few words why you feel this research is important?
Oh, my heavens. You got the rest of the day? No, it's very important because there's far too many. Oh, are we talking about prisoners or?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's crucially important because there's far too many prisoners with disability in prison. They shouldn't be there. They're not being given the proper treatment or human rights that they should be. And it needs to stop. It needs to be properly funded, and it needs to be, those prisoners need to be honoured by not being there, basically.
Yeah. And can I just mention, as I've mentioned everywhere, it's actually Dr. Auntie Rosalind Sackley. Ros was honoured by the University of Sydney last year for the work that she's done in Indigenous disability research for many years. And I think Auntie Ros is the first Indigenous person with disability to have acquired a degree in 1977. So we're very privileged to have her as part of the Black Ability team. And Auntie Ros and I have been doing co-research now for 17 years, haven't we, Auntie Ros?
Yes, it's nearly 20 years, Sharon.
I know.
And talk about co-design, like,
Yeah.
when we first started, nothing was there and everyone had their doubts and, all that kind of stuff, but we've kept together.
Yep.
Now, it's Mary speaking. I'm going to have to interrupt because
cut us off, Mary.
I'm sorry, and
that's okay.
Ros, my humblest apologies to you. The joys of inaccessible systems that
it was wonderful sitting in room number 1.
Now, the Barriers Within Bars project, as our one of our evidence synthesis, that's going to have its own release. And it's an amazing report, amazing literature review. And we're releasing that separately. Shala, Ros and Sharon are releasing that separately coming up very soon. So keep posted. We're now going to go back into room 1. I'll